Sitting atop the world at 29,029 feet elevation is not something everyone has on their bucket list. But David Roskelly had a whole lot more than just that day on the top of Everest in 2013. He also summited the other 8 highest peaks on the 7 continents. Math not adding up? I'll let him explain that one to you. But suffice it to say, this incredible athlete and regular everyday guy loves to do hard things. And he's here today to share why we can all do hard things. Join me for my discussion with David Roskelly, the first American to climb the 9 highest peaks on 7 continents and the world's tallest volcanoes on each of the 7 continents. I am loving his story. Stories are our lives in language. Welcome to the Love Your Story podcast. I'm Lori Lee, and I'm excited for our future together of telling stories, evaluating our own stories, and lifting ourselves and others to greater places because of our control over our stories. This podcast is about empowerment and giving you, the listener, ideas to work with in making your stories work for you. Story power serves you best when you know how to use it. David Roskelly is a partner in an environmental engineering firm called R&R Environmental, Inc., and he teaches public health at the University of Utah's Rocky Mountain Center for Occupational and Environmental Health as an adjunct professor. This Utah resident is clearly an avid mountaineer who has his next goals set on the moon. Literally, you'll hear more about that. That's a whole different story, though. David, I'm excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the Love Your Story podcast.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you and the viewers. Thank you.
Oh, excited to hear what you've got going on, because climbing the 9 highest peaks on, if you can talk to somebody who's climbed Everest or even some of the harder ones on the other continents, I think some of them are even harder to climb. But all of that plus the 7 highest volcanoes, you're just like out of this world. First, let me have you explain that. Why the 9 highest peaks on 7 continents?
Okay, so I do have to clarify really quickly. I've done 6 of the 7 high volcanoes. I have 1 more left. So once I finish that in January of 2020, I'm going to Antarctica to climb the high volcano down there. Then I'll be the first to summit, or the first American, that is, to summit all the 7 highest volcanoes on each of the 7 continents.
We are envisioning it as done.
Okay, yes, that is actually a good approach. Envisioning it done, that's half the battle, right? So yes, but I wanted to clarify. So 9 of 7, there's an interesting story behind that. And it has to do with geography and how people break up the continents and, a little political intrigue as well. So I'll start with Oceania. So Oceania is this continent down to the south, and it includes Australia, New Zealand, Melanesia, a lot of Polynesia. If you talk to an average Australian, which I've done, they claim the continent is just Australia. And if you ask them, well, what is New Zealand part of? Well, it's kind of its own thing. Well, it has to be something. So most in the world kind of lump it all together as Oceania. So down there's actually 2 peaks that most of the folks that are striving for the 7 summits try to attempt or try to climb. One is on Papua New Guinea, or it's Papua, Indonesia, because Indonesia is divided into 2. I know this is getting a little technical. So on the Indonesian side of Papua, there is a mountain called Carson's Pyramid, and that's close to 16,000 plus feet. It's very difficult to get to, and it's actually a climb. It's on the equator, and there's actually glaciers. When I was there in 2011, there's visible glaciers at the equator. It's very strange. And it's just like a National Geographic special. The high point of Australia is Kosciuszko, and it's only about 7,000 feet tall. You can take a chairlift most of the way to the summit. So most mountaineers, Australia is a wonderful continent, a beautiful mountain, but most don't really consider that to be any kind of a climbing challenge. So my wife has multiple sclerosis, and that was the last mountain I did, and she went with me to the summit.
Oh,
so it was
how
really
wonderful.
fun. It was a great experience, and she had supported me through all my climbing, and so it was great for her to go with me to the summit and stand. We had a picnic at the top, and it was wonderful.
That's super cool. We never do these things by ourselves, do we? There's always the support and the love of the people around us that
100%
to do great things.
Yeah, in fact, I'll interject. If you ever meet anybody who's climbed Everest or done something like this, if they use the word I a lot, I would call them out on it, because you never do this stuff on your own. Even if you solo something, you're not doing it on your own, because somebody had to teach you and they're there for you. So especially with Everest, the Sherpa people are so good about helping you get to the summit that you can't talk about Everest and not talk about the local people that help everybody climb.
I was actually going to ask you about that because, and this is not to belittle the climb to Everest at all, but anymore, it seems like if you can just pay a lot of money that they haul, not everything, but your dining table. And, basically you've just got to have the stamina to make it to the top. So it's become so commercialized that it becomes less of a feat. And even people who are not mountaineers can do it. How do you think yours was different than that?
I do hear that comment, and it does give me pause. It still takes a tremendous amount of effort to get to the summit. And so it is absolutely not something that every man or every woman could do. But having good Sherpa support makes a big, big difference. And having their direction, it's like golfing with a really good caddy. They're showing you the hole, where to lay your shot up, what club to choose. So they're really, really good. I did absolutely see folks being pulled up the mountain. They call it short roping, where they kind of, they're pushing and pulling, and the Sherpas are really trying to help somebody. But it's very dangerous game to play, because you get up there and really difficult to get back down. So
you couldn't do it without the Sherpas, could you?
No, not a chance. And again, anybody that says differently, they're fooling themselves. They're not really being genuine about what they just accomplished.
How did you get your training in mountaineering?
I didn't really go through any kind of formal training. I came out to school. So as a freshman, I came out to BYU in 1986 and was just smitten with the mountains. And one of the very first ones I climbed was Timpanogos. And instantly, I'd been out to Utah in my youth. I grew up in Chicago. And so I'd seen the mountains, but, hadn't spent a ton of time in them until I came out to school, and then ultimately settled here in Utah, and have just, slowly but surely been climbing for decades.
Did you go late enough in the summer that the snow was melted and you could actually get up there without crampons?
For Timpanogos?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Because it was in the fall for school, but I go up there a lot now, even when there is snow or not snow.
Yeah. It's a beautiful hike. I think it's one of my very favorites because it has everything. You have this 360-degree view from the top, but you've also got a glacier, and you've got the mountain goats, and you've got waterfalls, and you've got wildflowers, everything. Usually there's one of those things that people do a hike for, but with Timpanogos, you get like everything.
I live basically at the base of it, and I look at it all the time, and I trail run up there all the time. I love it. Timp is a great mountain. You could throw that up against lots of international mountains in the Alps and other locations. So I'm not going to sell Timpanogos or Utah short in the mountain department. We have some great ones.
Okay, so I interrupted you because I had so many other questions, but you were talking about the 9. So you ended up doing 9 because you needed to throw in one for Oceanica because you just want to make sure and cover your bases.
That's right. Now we'll move to Europe really quickly. And the list for Europe includes 2 mountains. One is Mont Blanc, and that's on the border of France and Italy. And that's actually the first one I did. So that's firmly right in Europe. The other peak, and I think this is the one that most people consider and climb, is the peak in southern Russia. And it's Mount Elbrus. Sorry, I'm having a senior moment for a second. My apologies. It's called Mount Elbrus, as they say in Russia. And that's down in southern Russia in the Caucasus. And so there are some that don't consider Russia part of Europe. And that's why some climb Mont Blanc and some climb Elbrus. And I just did them both just because I wanted to do them both. So I actually did 9. My wife teases me and says I'm kind of an overachiever. And
that was the word that was coming to mind. Overachiever.
So the list of folks that have actually done 9 is very, very small. So of 7 summiters, there's probably, it's getting bigger because more people are doing it. It's probably about 400 or 500 now. Utahns, there's 4 of us. We know everybody. There is like an official handshake, and you get, official passwords and things at the summit, and
secret combinations.
None of that. We were joking about that the other day, but we had a little get together. But so there's not a whole lot of folks. I would say there's probably less than 30 people that have done the 9. So it's not, it's a very big group.
It's a phenomenal accomplishment, and I'll bet you've had a great time.
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Just a great experience, and have learned and grown, and just it's just been so enriching to do this. Had wonderful things, lessons learned that I had no idea I was even going to learn them before I started climbing.
Isn't that how life is? I think so many times this idea of, I don't dare do something, or this is something that I should do, but is it a waste of time, or am I being selfish? Or, really and truly, if we went after the things that we felt deeply in our heart, it's going to take us exactly where we need to go and teach us what we need to be taught, because that's our path. And we can find lessons and experiences in the most unlikely places. Not that climbing the 9 highest peaks in the world would be an unlikely place, but there's so much, and I'm excited to get into your stories. But I also wanted to point out that you have a blog, and as I was reading it, there was just a paragraph here that I wanted to bring up. You said, many people ask why I choose to set the 7 summits as a goal. The answers are not exactly simple, and I'm not 100% certain myself. However, I love to do difficult things and would encourage anyone reading this post to set a difficult goal and work toward it. Otherwise, we tend to float through life rudderless. Recently, I've been reading a book by Edward Whymper, Scrambles in the Alps, where he discusses patient, difficult, laborious toil in the mountains and how it helps us come back to our daily occupations better fitted to fight the battle of life and overcome impediments which obstruct our paths, strengthened and cheered by the recollection of past labors. For me, it's easier to contend with traffic, email, commuting, phone calls, constant work obligations, etc. after completing something very difficult. I just focus on the accomplishment, and everything else pales in comparison. Don't think everyone's difficult is the same, and don't feel you have to climb big mountains or run marathons to accomplish something. Everyone's challenges are different, and for some it would be easier to walk across Asia than to speak in public or get married or finish their education, unquote. So I love this because it's insightful and it's wise. Can you talk to me about this idea of doing difficult things? And do you think that that's part of the human psyche to crave challenge?
Well, it is for me very easily. It's in my DNA. And I wrote that in 2013 after I'd finished Everest. So I hadn't finished the 7 summits or the 9 yet. But, I love doing difficult things. And when you do difficult things, it stretches you. And just as we were talking about before, you find strength and uncover things about yourself that you didn't even know existed. I mentioned to you earlier that I'd listened to your podcast with the Iron Cowboy. Mm-hmm. And when he was talking about how difficult that was for him, there's no way I could do that, by the way, 50 Ironmans. That's pretty impressive.
I can't believe anyone could do it. I can't believe he could. I can't believe it's even doable.
It was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But, when he was talking about doing those difficult things, he was speaking to me. I heard exactly, we're cut from the same cloth. So he gets it, and it's in his DNA as well. But I've really thought more about why I like to do difficult things, and I still don't have the complete answer yet. And it's now been 6 years, plus. I'm working on it more, but I've narrowed it down to a few things. One of them is I love setting a good example. I have 3 boys. They're 21, 19, and 15. I love setting a good example for them. And I have encouraged them to climb. If they don't want to, they don't have to. I've taken them on some climbs, but they have different likes and passions, and I encourage them to do those. But hopefully by me setting a goal and doing something difficult, they will get strength from that and want to do difficult things. Also, my wife, I like to set a good example for her. She has multiple sclerosis, and it's hard for her at the moment to walk more than a block or two. That would be an extreme challenge for her. I joke once in a while and say we're at different ends of the mobility scale. I can climb Everest, and she has a hard time walking to the car. Of course, that's not to slight her. We have a very good relationship and I can, lovingly joke with her. But, I am certain that she gets strength from me doing things like this. And I'm very supportive of her and she's very supportive of me. But I do think if you set a goal, there's something special about setting a goal and overcoming a fear and reaching, the end of something super difficult. There's no question. I think there's more strength in doing something physically difficult. And I don't know what all the moving parts are there, but when you physically do something, there's just some chemistry and there's just something going on there that helps you overcome, and you'd be a stronger person once you get to the other end of it.
So doing the physical creates, and doing physically difficult things, do you think that creates an aptitude and a history for being able to create mentally and emotionally difficult things when they hit you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've seen it in my own life. And that's something I wouldn't even have. I didn't think that I would have learned that lesson having accomplished this goal, but absolutely has. I've seen it at work. I've seen it in my personal life. I'm the same as anybody else. There's certain things that I don't want to do. And so, I'll get asked to do something and okay, I can do this. I can muscle through this and make this happen. And I can draw on the strength from things that I've overcome.
I have done enough mountaineering to know that mountaineering is not just a physical process. Mountaineering is a space that is very mental because
for sure.
You're controlling your mind, you're controlling your attitude. There's the way that you're picturing things, so whether you're believing you can do it or not. I mean, it's a very mental and physical track.
I've heard a couple of gold medal Olympic winners speak, and they have said, and I didn't quite understand this when I heard it the first time, probably 15 years ago, but they said, something to the effect it's 75, 80% mental attitude and, 20% physical. You have to have your mind wrapped around it. And the older I get and the more I accomplish, I do agree with that. You can be the most accomplished athlete in the world, but if you don't have a positive attitude and think you're going to accomplish a goal, it's not going to happen.
A couple of years ago, I interviewed an Olympian, Shannon Happy. She's a silver medalist in the Olympics for women's downhill moguls. And we were talking about what it took, like the mindset. How do you get to an Olympic level like that? And literally a really big part of what she was doing, of course, there was the years and the days of practice, the repetitive practice over and over. But really, when she started winning was when she could visualize and when she could really get into that flow space. And it was getting into that mental training that tipped the scales. That you've got to have the physical to do it, but it's that mental that actually takes you there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Interestingly enough, this isn't a fact that's super well known, but the more I started researching and the more I started climbing, this became evident very quickly. Most people wouldn't realize that the mean age for summiting Everest is 44. It has been. I think it's probably adjusted the last 2 years, but it's traditionally been 44. I think it's surprising probably to a lot of people that you tend to think it's for younger people and, a kind of a younger man's game. And that isn't necessarily the case. It's an older person's game. And I think part of the reason why is the younger folks, I wasn't mature enough in my 20s to be able to summit Everest. And so, there are some confounders. Of course, it costs a lot of money and it takes time, but I think there's something to an older individual having the patience and that life experience to just be very patient to be able to summit.
Well, and you've practiced enough. Really, these things, the mentality, the courage, that comes from flexing that muscle over and over and over, having been through hard things, knowing you can get through it. Okay, so I want to hear some of your stories. You've been on these 9 different peaks and then 6 different volcanoes. What are your favorite stories? And maybe something they taught you. Pick out 2 or 3.
This is interesting. Before I started climbing, I would say kind of to this level 15 years ago or so, I would have never, and I don't mean to make this any kind of political platform at all, but I would have never thought or talked about global warming whatsoever. And it's been really interesting to climb and go to Antarctica, go way north and go to the equator and hear people talk about snow melting, glaciers melting. And I've seen enough enough and experienced enough now. I wasn't even looking for it. It just kept popping up. And so I'm fully convinced that the planet is getting warmer. I think the controversy is what's causing it, but there's no doubt in my mind, just having traveled as much as I have. So the last trip I got back about 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago now, I was down in Papua New Guinea climbing the high volcano. And we were at 12,000 feet at a base camp for the mountain we were climbing. It's called Mount Gilloway. And our guide, who happens to, his family owns the land, we're standing at 12,000 feet jungle. And he just unsolicited says, "Do you see that vine over there with these really delicate orchids growing on it?" And I said, "Yeah." And there was some fruit beginning to form. He goes, "That has never grown at this elevation before. I've talked to a family. They've never had it at 12,000 feet." So that kind of sparked some conversation. We started talking to him more and we said, "Does it ever snow here? Does it ever get frost? You know, the mountain is 14,000 and some change." And he said, "It used to, it doesn't anymore." And so we started asking him about global warming, and he really hadn't heard about it. He's a native Papuan, doesn't really have access to television and Western media like we would. And here he is bringing this fact up that was unsolicited, and it was just really fascinating to hear him talk about that. We didn't even plan to have the conversation. So
that's really interesting, and especially from firsthand experience.
Yeah, so, that's interesting. I've been to Kilimanjaro twice, which people ask, what is your favorite mountain? And it would absolutely be Kilimanjaro. I love going there. One of the things I really like about it, I'm going to try to sell you on going as well, and listeners, it's the high volcano and high mountain of Africa. And it's fabulous to go to Africa and experience that. It's in Tanzania. And you go and experience just a wonderful culture, wonderful people. Not one person, the 2 times I've been, has been rude. They're just so humble and nice. You get to go climb a mountain that's almost 20,000 feet tall, and then you can come back down and do safari for 2 or 3 days. It is life-changing to go and have that experience. I think I've said this many times, any reasonably fit person can summit Kilimanjaro if you have the right weather window and you take it slowly. My sister went with me 3 years ago, and she's just a couple years younger than me. She made it. She's reasonably fit, and my niece made it. My 12-year-old son made it to the summit. So I try to sell people on going because I just think it's a wonderful mountain to go climb.
Tell me a story of something that happened to you there in Africa.
Just experience. This is unrelated to climbing, but I'm going to share this with you anyway, because this is something that popped up from my experiences, and I do this now on every trip. I was taught some really fun lessons about just humanity and poverty. Of course, when you travel to some of these places, you're running into people that have essentially nothing. And it's been really fun over the years. I usually make a habit of going to Walmart before I leave. I'll buy 3, 4, 5 soccer balls, take the air out, and bring some pumps. I bring candy. This last trip, which was really wild, I'm getting on another story here. I'm just going to spend 30 seconds. I found a package of glow sticks at Walmart. They were for sale there for 99 cents. I thought, I bet those guys in Papua New Guinea have never seen glow sticks. So I bought 3 or 4 packages. We're sitting around the campfire with my son. We cracked them. They had never seen it. We're just blown away that light would come from this glowing plastic stick. It was really fun.
Kind of exciting to show them something they've never seen.
It was really exciting, and it was fun to share. But so we've taken soccer balls, candy. I also take, and I would encourage people to do this. You don't have to go do this when you're traveling, but do it anywhere, especially where there's people that have much less than us as Americans. I have one of those little instant camera, like a Polaroid, and that gives you the picture. It prints out. You get a group of kids, take pictures of them. We bring a Sharpie along and we'll give the kids the picture and write their name on it. And then they stand there for a minute or 2 while it's developing. And for many of them, they've never seen a photo of themselves. And so it's like this instant gift to these kids. And they just go bananas over it. They love it. So we did this I've done it probably 10 times. But when we were in Africa for our second trip, we were giving soccer balls away. We just pull up like on the street and there's kids kicking, dirt clods around for a soccer ball. And we'd just show up and throw a soccer ball out the window to them and some candy. It's like, who is this guy throwing soccer balls? So our driver says, hey, these kids are not poor. You need to go see some poor kids. So he took us to an orphanage, and there were 40, 50 kids kids that had a soccer field in front of their house or in front of where they lived, no soccer balls. So we showed up and threw a couple out on the grass, and we had 50 kids out there that we played soccer with for about half an hour. It was really, really fun.
Fun.
And it was totally impromptu. We didn't set anything up. The driver just said, hey, let's go over here because there's some poor kids that need some love. And we took pictures with them and gave them candy and brightened somebody's day.
Some of the best things are impromptu, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. So it's been fun. And these are the kinds of things that I've experienced. And it's been part of the experience of climbing the mountain. And just had such a fun time getting to meet people and meet different cultures and just have that wonderful experience traveling.
What's the hardest thing you've ever had to do on any of the mountains?
People ask me that once in a while, and Denali is definitely in Alaska. That's the most difficult one that I have climbed so far. Part of it is really, really cold. It's colder than Everest. I think it's the coldest mountain I've ever climbed. I would not have said this 10, 15 years ago before I started climbing. I do believe it now, and I'm willing to admit it in public. I do believe that mountains have a spirit, and each of them is different. It's unique. They have their own personality. Denali, I think, is a female spirit, and she's mean, and she doesn't want people climbing on her. So she does everything she can to kick you off.
That's really
the only
interesting.
one that took me. It's the only one that took me twice. So I went up the first time, didn't summit, and then went back the following year and was fortunate enough to summit that mountain. But it's really, really cold. There's a lot of exposure. And I climbed it with two friends of mine, and we climbed it just on our own. We didn't climb with like a guided group or anything like that. And just had a great experience, but I don't have like some story about me falling and putting in my ice axe and hanging off a cliff or something. I have not had any of those experiences, but I would say... Thank goodness, yes. I've probably come close and, don't even know it. But, I would say Denali is probably the closest I've had to experiences like that.
Have you ever been on any climbs where there were any near-death experiences?
Well, yeah, on Everest, there's bodies all over the place. And we actually talked about it before we went up because above the South Col in the area is called the death zone. So approximately above about 25,000 feet on any mountain is considered the death zone. It is such because there's only about a third the available oxygen that there is at sea level. So when you take a deep breath, you're only getting a third the oxygen molecules that you would at sea level. And why it's called the death zone is literally because your body is dying when you're in that elevation, above that elevation. You can't put enough calories in your body and you can't bring enough oxygen in to actually survive. And so you're going to die up there if you stay. So if I were to stick around up there, even with supplemental oxygen above the 25,000 feet for more than 3, 4, 5 days, even acclimated, you would die. And you feel like you are. You feel like it. You don't feel very good. And that you have to overcome that. But there are, I think to date, like 230 bodies, something like that now, that just remain up there. They're too difficult to get down. So when you're climbing above the South Col, Camp 4 on Everest, you're climbing up and you see bodies. The snow melts and there they are. The interesting thing is the conditions are so dry and it's so cold that they preserve. They don't deteriorate. So they kind of look like a mummy, very sun bleached, but I guess it's not as gruesome as you think. And I'm not going to go into a lot of description. I did not take any photos, but we talked about it before you went up so that you'd be prepared for it. And I choose not to focus on that when I was climbing. And even now, it's unfortunate that people are up there, but it's one of those things. It would take a dozen people to bring a body down, and the odds are pretty good that 1 or 2 people would perish bringing somebody down. So everybody asks, why don't they bring them down? That's why. And helicopters can't fly that high. At least the current technology that we're aware of can't fly that high. So there's not enough lift.
What is it inside you that gives you the strength to do things that are this difficult?
So that's what I don't know. And I think there's something in my DNA. I was born with it and I just love it. The more challenging, the better. I still haven't found my physical limit yet. I'm 50 now, so I've gone beyond whatever prime I had when I was in my 30s or something, or 40s, whenever that prime is. I'm mature and old enough to know that I'm on the downhill slide. Fitness wise, I still have a lot in me, but I don't know what it is. It's just there, and it's that will to drive and survive and explore. I joke once in a while with my wife, if I was at the time of Columbus, I'd have been one of the first to get on the ship. I would have lined up easily to go on an Apollo mission if they'd let me. I would line up for any of that kind of stuff, go and explore and see new worlds.
What advice would you give to people? Like you mentioned in the blog post, everybody's difficult is something different. So as people are considering what their own difficult is and the difficult thing in front of them, what advice do you have to help them push past fear and move forward with that same kind of focus and dedication to do the hard things?
When I talk to specifically youth groups or others, sometimes I do some corporate speaking and I talk to them about setting a goal. I think it's important when you set a goal to be realistic, of course, but set the goal, difficult enough that you can't accomplish it within a week or two. Something if you say you're physically fit and you need some training and you want to run a marathon, you're not going to go do it tomorrow. But if your goal is 6 months or a year from now and that's the goal you want to set, I think that's probably what I try to encourage people to do is set something that's out there that's going to take some training and discipline, and not just the big goal. You have to set the big goal, but also set all these other little minor goals to get there. Okay, today I'm going to be running 2-3 miles, or I'm starting with walking first, or I have to lose weight first, or whatever it is, all these things to get you to that higher goal. The other thing I would say about setting goals is I was raised to set goals and to write them down. I encourage people to take it a step further and share that goal with somebody significant in your life. Brother, sister, parent, spouse, clergy, somebody significant in your life, and they should be significant enough that they will help you achieve that goal.
What do you think about visualizing? How powerful, and do you use that at all? The visualization of it completed so that you've kind of already gone there and make your way through.
So that's important. I'm not one of those. I know I have some friends that have done like vision boards and done those things, and my mind doesn't work that way, although I do think there's a lot of strength in that. So people will put these kind of vision boards together with where they want their life to be in a year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is that they want to accomplish. And I think there's power in that. That isn't necessarily a tool that I use all the time, but I absolutely, when I start a climb, I 100% visualize myself standing at the top. And yes, it is powerful. Absolutely.
So where are you going next?
Yeah, that's a good question. So probably the next climb will be in Antarctica in January. So our winter is their summer. Our winter solstice on December 21st is actually their longest day in Antarctica. So most people will go to climb and work and visit and whatnot down there in December, January, February. It's really bizarre because the sun never sets. It just spins around in a tight circle, and it's like you're on another planet.
So you've been there before?
I did, yeah, because I climbed Vincent, which is the high point of Antarctica.
Okay.
And now I'm going to go do the volcano. And
are you prepared?
Why didn't you do it when you were there?
Are you all prepared? Is it different climbing a volcano than climbing a highest peak?
No, it's generally the same thing. It's just the structure of a volcano, the way it was formed in the earth is different than a mountain. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to, now it's summertime in the Northern Hemisphere, and today in Utah, it'll be 90 something. So I'm going to have to acclimatize, as we speak, my blood's getting thinner, and generally you want kind of thicker blood to handle the cold. So I shouldn't say this, but I joke and say I came out of the womb sweaty. I don't even think I was cold out of the chute there. I'm always warm. So I actually function much better in like 20 degrees. That's my 20, 30 degrees. I love it.
Sounds like mountaineering is your gig. You were born for it.
I think so.
So what about this assault on the moon?
Right. It got me thinking. I thought, well, I'm going to finish this goal with climbing all the volcanoes. And it got me thinking. I started doing some research. I'd love to go to the moon. So I am old enough that I was born before man walked on the moon. And I was born in 1968. And it got me thinking. I started doing some research and talking to people. They only identified the high point of the moon about 5-10 years ago. And it's about 35,000 feet above mean. So it's taller than Everest. And I thought, what a fun goal to set to reach the high point of the moon. I personally think it's closer to happening than people might think. I was always, of course, I was raised to set goals. I've heard Jim Harbaugh speak, and he's a coach at Michigan right now. I've heard him speak, and he said, if your goals aren't big enough that it doesn't cause people to chuckle or laugh when you say them, you're not setting them high enough. So I thought, why not set a goal to go to the high point of the moon? If it's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be with Elon Musk. And you're not going to walk to the high point. You have to drive something. So I thought it'd be fun to try to convince Elon to, build some kind of a Tesla moon vehicle and drive to the summit.
I am giving you all the good luck and energy toward that. Seriously, I haven't heard of a bigger goal.
Yeah, why not, right? The U.S. just announced just a week or two ago that they're trying to go back to the moon within the next 2 or 3 years. So it's a thing,
My son is interested in astrophysics. And so he was, every once in a while he sends me a YouTube video or something. And I was watching one the other day that I had no idea the stuff that was going on. They're doing some really serious research and planning and creating things that, like you say, would make that totally possible. But we're not hearing anything about it unless you're looking for it, right? Or
that's right. And I personally think within the next 5 years, if we were having this discussion in 5 years, unless there's been some tragedy or something like that puts everything on hold, if everything goes smoothly, I think this in 5 years, people will be going to the moon. They'll be doing research. There just will be more happening surrounding the moon, and this won't sound as weird as saying it in 2019. So give it about 4 or 5 years.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here and sharing your goals and your stories and your insights. You're an incredible athlete and an atypical human being to just be able to march up these summits.
Yeah, that's very nice of you to say. It's very kind of you. And I appreciate the opportunity to share with others. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. What hard things are you working on in your life? As we discussed in the beginning of this podcast, everyone's difficult is something different. And I'd like to remind you that the difficult you are in today is giving you the strength that you will need to be who you are supposed to be. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that. Sometimes it feels like the difficult that's hitting you is just a shit show. Excuse the swear word, but sometimes it just feels like it's coming at you. But the truth is that every time we have to flex those muscles of determination and focus and strength and courage, that we get stronger. And with that strength, we become who we're supposed to be able to do what is ahead of us. As the ever popular phrase goes, you can do hard things. We say this because sometimes we need the reminder that we are powerful, courageous. And so far, our track record for making it through hard things is 100%. You're still here. And that's a pretty darn good rate of success. Your challenge this week is to consider if you need to set a goal, something big and wonderful that feels hard and scary. And if you do, take a deep breath, embrace the vision of it happening, and then write that puppy down because you can do hard things. Thanks for being with us today. Remember, loveyourstorypodcast.com for access to all the past episodes with other inspirational interviews and topics. You can also, from the website, buy your t-shirt. You can get a link to buy my new fun book, Life, Living Intentional and Fearless Every Day. Join that fun trend. Right now, people are picking up that book and it's become sort of a trend of making groups and doing these 21 challenges together. So Life, Living Intentional and Fearless Every Day is made up of 21 life connection challenges. So super fun to do with couples, super fun to do as families, super fun with a group of friends or women's groups, networking groups. So 21 life challenges that you get to tackle and have a great time with. You can also find it on Amazon. So just Google Life in capital letters and Lori Lee, and it'll pop right up. If you're part of the crowd that has jumped onto the 21 Life Connection Challenges in my book, I'd love to hear about your experiences because I'm really enjoying that feedback. So drop me a line on the website or on Facebook on the Love Your Story podcast Facebook page, and we will see you next week.